We're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do that, I'll go over a couple of housekeeping items. And first off, I just want to say welcome to week 5 of our Stay Calm and Well webinar series with regard to rejuvenation and renewing. If you have any questions or technical difficulties throughout the webinar, please use the chat feature. Let us know. I think Gina's going to have you pop some things into the chat throughout the session as well today. So we're looking forward to that. If you have a question that you'd like to have answered at the end of the session, please use the Q&A feature. And if someone has a question similar to yours, please use the little thumbs up button on the question to like it. And the questions will kind of filter to the top. And we'll do our best to get to all of the questions at the end of the session. Finally, if you need closed captions throughout this webinar, please use the Zoom menu. You can click the More button, or there's a little CC button or on your screen. You can either turn on the transcript or turn off the transcript there. So with that, if you've got any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, I'd like to introduce Gina Forster, who is our Assistant Director of Nutrition for Student Life Dining Services here at Ohio State in the Office of Student Life. And she's going to talk to us today about dieting and how to start living with intuitive eating. So I'll pass it to Gina. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so the title of my presentation today is Stop Dieting and Start Living with Intuitive Eating. I could talk about this for hours, but we only have 30 minutes, so I do apologize. I'm going to go through this pretty fast, but hopefully you'll have time at the end for questions. And also, you can email me at any time, or if you just want to chat about intuitive eating at any time, I'm always open for that. So skills building review from last week, week 4, identify one area within the physical domain to rejuvenate or renew one's vitality, such as body movement, nutrition, recovery. Identify one area within the emotional domain, such as gratitude and cultivating self-compassion, which we'll actually talk about as well today. Identify one area within the mental domain, optimizing a supportive inner voice. And then lastly, identify one area within the spiritual domain, such as strategies to create a personal purpose statement. Okay, so now into today's topic, intuitive eating and ditching diets. Just a little bit about our objectives. We're going to describe intuitive eating, identify pros and cons of different diets. I'll give you a hint, mainly cons. Interpret the hunger scale and describe how it feels to be hungry versus ravenous and comfortably full versus uncomfortably full. Identify your internal signals for hunger and fullness. Assess current off-limit foods and recognize the value of giving yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods. Examine ways to improve your self-care. Determine alternatives to food for handling emotions. And then lastly, identify resources for further learning. All right, we're going to start with a poll. I wanted to ask how many of you have heard of intuitive eating? So have you heard of intuitive eating? Yes or no? And we'll just give them like 15 seconds to answer the question.
Are you able to see the poll results as well?
I'm not,
So did you click polls on the bottom?
I did.
I guess, okay.
It doesn't give me the answers.
Sure. We've got about 90% of the group responded, so I'll just go ahead and end it and I will share the results.
Okay. Oh, great. So about half of you have heard of it and the other half haven't, but the majority of you have not. Awesome. Thank you. So intuitive eating, straight from the book, is a self-care eating framework which integrates instinct, which kids are really good at, eating based on instinct, emotion and feelings, and rational thought, which we develop as we become adults. There's 10 principles, and the ones in bold we're going to be focusing on today. First is reject diet mentality, then honor your hunger. My favorite principle is make peace with food. And then the other one we'll talk about is coping with emotions without using food. And then all the others, if you're interested, I can talk about it afterwards. I will show you the book if you'd like to know about the book, where you can read about all the other principles that are part of intuitive eating. Okay, so what intuitive eating is not, very, very important here. It's not a diet. I am an anti-diet dietitian. You'll never meet with me and have me tell you what to eat and how much to eat. That's just not what I do, although I did in a past life. But intuitive eating is not a diet. So the cornerstone of intuitive eating is self-care. The basics of self-care include getting adequate sleep, finding a life-work balance or a balance in your life, nourishment, giving yourself plenty of calories, plenty of fluids, water, self-nurturance, going the extra mile to do some things to really take care of yourself, such as, going out for a walk and having a cup of tea, or sitting out on your patio, or getting a massage, or reading a book, nurturing yourself. Self-compassion. We'll talk about this during the dealing with emotions without using food principle. Coming at yourself with curiosity, not judgment, and not making yourself feel guilty for eating certain foods. So that's just part of the self-compassion part of self-care. And that was my son, by the way, at 3 months. He did have that much hair, but I just love that photo because he just looks so calm. He's 4 now, if that tells you anything. All right, so principle 1, reject diet mentality. Another poll question and the last question, and David, I'll have to tell you, give him like 10 seconds to answer. But the question is, what percentage of dieters keep weight off, according to the book, Body Respect by Lindo Bacon? What do you think? What percent? There's 5%, 15%, 25%, or 35%?
We've got responses coming in. We'll give it another second. We've got about 250 of the 300 people here. So. Okay, I will close it and share.
Okay. All right, so 55% of you were right. The answer is 5%. And here's the thing, that study actually looked out only 1 year. So after 1 year of dieting, a year after being on a diet, only 5% of people kept weight off. So imagine what that number looks like after 2 years, 10 years, etc. You can only imagine it's virtually zero. Okay, so I made this, I've never made this before, a word cloud, and I put all the different diets that came up when I hit Google. I feel like I could have made it much, much bigger, but you can probably look at this and say that you've probably heard of the majority of these. I could have made this much, much bigger, like I just said, but there are ultimately thousands upon thousands of different diets out there that you can put your hand in the grab bag and choose. So all diets have some things in common. And I guess I'm just wondering, can anyone tell me what you think when you think of dieting? What might they have in common? What's kind of like the one common denominator? And there's several, but one ultimate common denominator that diets have. Yes, thank you. Restrictions, eating less. Everyone's writing it. Yes, that's really the key word, is restrictions and what not to eat, right? Even when I was pushing diets back in my younger dietitian days, I actually even knew then not to talk to my clients about restricting foods. I focused more on what to eat, but no diet does that. They're all about restrictions and telling you what not to eat. That's not fun. The endless cycle of dieting. So you personally might be really familiar with this, or at least you know several people in your family or your circle of friends who are familiar with this cycle. So you've got this desire to be thin or lose X amount of weight, or even just change the body fat percentage on your body. You choose a diet, you put your hand in the grab bag of diets, you choose a diet. Ultimately, you have cravings, which lead to binging, or just times when you're overeating. And then ultimately you regain that weight or get back to where you were at the beginning, most often actually gaining more weight than you had at the beginning of the diet cycle. And then it's just a vicious cycle that continues. Many people fear that if they stop dieting, they'll never stop eating. But the truth is, it's the dieting that almost always causes the overeating. And I have a question for you. How might dieting contribute to overeating? What do you think? Any thoughts? Yes, always thinking about food. Yes, I remember recently I forgot to bring my breakfast, so I didn't have any food in my office. And literally all morning, all I could think about was food because I knew I didn't have it. That's exactly what happens when you restrict food. Cravings. Yes, absolutely. So in the long run, dieting contributes to overeating because of the restrictions. and ultimately the cravings that almost always, I should say always, end up happening because our biology is stronger and will ultimately win. The diet industry is a $72.7 billion industry. Their goal is to make you feel like the failure, but it's actually the diets that are failing you. It's important to ask yourself if diets worked, would there actually be 5 new ones every single year? Probably not. And I say 5, there's probably so many more than that. All right, principle number 2 is honor your hunger. This is a picture of the hunger scale. It goes from 1 to 10. The sweet spot is really in between that 4 and 6. So you're going to want to eat when you're starting to get hungry before you really have those stomach grumbles. That's actually almost past the time when you should be eating. And then you want to eat until you're really comfortably full. You've probably heard it before. Try to leave your belly like 10 to 20% empty, which is so generic. How do you know? But you don't want to eat until you feel full, basically. You want to leave some room in there. Now, are you a bad person for eating beyond that or eating when you're not very hungry? Absolutely not. The idea here is just to give you just a guideline of when to eat and then when to stop, just something to think about. So what signs does your body give you that you are hungry? And you can go ahead and type that in. Yeah, lightheaded, stomach growling, tummy grumble, a headache, hard time focusing. Oh, someone gets cold. Maybe that's why I'm cold right now, because I am a little bit hungry. Feeling faint, fatigue, absolutely. So everyone, this is good. So if you're writing these in the comment section, that's good. You get the award for being attuned to your body, especially when you can even notice something like a slight headache or maybe you're a little bit more uptight when you're hungry. If you're noticing that, that's great. You're taking the first step to being an attuned, intuitive eater. But don't get hangry. Obviously, when you get to that point where you're hangry or even lightheaded or a headache, you've gotten past that that hunger that you're supposed to be. You're past that sweet spot of a 4, right? You're probably in that maybe 3 or 2. So primal hunger happens when your biological hunger is ignored. So those biological signs, slight stomach growling, you just notice you're a little bit hungry. That's your biological hunger. Primal hunger happens when you're hangry, right? Your primal hunger takes over. You walk in, after a long day at work, you haven't eaten maybe all day or since 12 o'clock, and you go to the kitchen and you just can't stop eating. I've definitely been there. Primal hunger, I liken it to when you were a kid. And I don't know about you, but I used to do this where I would have contests with my friends to see who could stay underwater the longest. And we go underwater, we'd hold our breath, and then we'd finally come up for air and you just gasp for air. You just can't get air in quick enough. And that's what happens when we have primal hunger and we let ourselves get too hungry. So what are some things that you can do to prevent primal hunger from taking over? And you can go ahead and type that into the chat box, just some ideas. Snack. Yes, snacks. I'm a huge fan of snacks. In fact, right before I got on here, because I knew I was starting to get a little bit hungry, I brought, I don't know if any of you have done these yet, but pumpkin seeds. Yes, eat regularly, eat frequently, drink water. These are all great ideas, great ways to prevent yourself from getting too hungry and letting your primal hunger take over. When I met my husband, he would never eat snacks before going to restaurants. We'd be eating at 8 p.m. It'd be 6 o'clock and he'd say, I'm hungry. And I'd say, have a snack. No, he wouldn't have a snack because we're going to dinner at 8. But as we know, we don't get our food till 8:30. By the time we would get served, he'd be hangry. Primal hunger would take over and he'd eat everything in sight. Since being married to me, though, he has learned not to do that. Okay, principle number 3, make peace with food. I did tell you at the beginning of this presentation, this is my favorite principle. It is the one that really got me really started on my intuitive eating journey. You do not have to do the principles one after the other in the order that's in the book that I'll talk about at the end. I actually started with principle number 3, which is making peace with food. In a random survey of 2,075 adults, 45% said they feel guilty after eating foods they like. The assumption is those are going to be foods like cake, pizza, burgers. So things that might be considered bad foods, right? So almost half of the adults in this survey said they feel guilty after eating those foods. And that brings me to the idea of unconditional permission to eat. When you have conditions around what you eat, such as restriction, dieting, you live in your head and second guess the needs of your body. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm hungry, a turkey burger and some sweet potato fries sounds really, really good. You're thinking, okay, well, I've already had 20 points and I need 20 points more, but I want to make room for 5 points for my glass of wine later. So you're living in your head instead of actually thinking about what your body needs and what actually sounds good to you. So satisfaction, right? Food restriction and limitation is actually what contributes to overconsumption because we're living in our head so much. And by the end of the day, you've restricted yourself so much, you just want to eat. Your biology takes over, and ultimately that overconsumption happens. So giving yourself unconditional permission to eat is ultimately going to be the best thing for you. And this is something that I'm going to go over with you in like 2 minutes because this presentation's short, but it is my favorite chapter of the intuitive eating book. And it makes so much more sense, I think, when you actually read it. But we're going to go a little bit more into that. So do you personally have any off-limit foods or foods that you limit that you would like to share in the chat box? And I will tell you, I'm going to let you guys be honest and kind of let it all out here. I'm going to tell you for a long time, I restricted 2 things. Cake, which is my favorite food of all time, and pizza, because I just thought it was too sugary and too high in carbs. I also restricted peanut butter because it was too high in fat. Awesome. So you guys, candy, chocolate, pizza, bread, sweets, potato chips, cashews. Oh man, cashews. But hey, I used to restrict peanut butter, bread, candy. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you everyone for Diet Coke. Okay. Thank you everyone for writing that in there. I appreciate you being vulnerable. So everyone, or it sounds like a lot of you have some off-limit foods. And here's the thing. There are certain medical conditions and chronic conditions that would warrant limiting certain foods, and that is a different story. But if you have a food that you just do not allow yourself to have for no reason other than because diet culture has told you not to eat it, that is what I'm referring to now. Okay, so if you're looking at me right now and saying, Gina, give myself unconditional permission to eat whatever I feel, well, then I'm just going to eat cake all day. And trust me, when I first gave myself unconditional permission to eat, I did eat a lot of cake and I did eat a lot of peanut butter and I did eat a lot of pizza because those are the 3 foods that I love and I was restricting. But eventually, when you continue to give yourself that unconditional, not conditional, unconditional permission to eat, what will eventually happen is that those foods that you just love and that you once restricted will fit into your balanced diet. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to give it a try. And there's a reason for that. It's called habituation. So habituation explains what happens when you are repeatedly exposed to the same stimulus. For example, a sign on your drive home. You might see it every single day. After a while, you just ignore it. A smell in your house. You walk in, it smells terrible, but after an hour of being in your house, you don't even notice it until your mom walks in and tells you your house smells terrible. Or a food, which is what I'm talking about today. The novelty of it begins to wear off. So look at this stack of pancakes. You think to yourself, oh my gosh, that looks so good. Really, the best bites of that food are going to be maybe the first 10 or 20. After that, it just isn't good anymore. So same thing with any other food that you allow yourself unconditional permission to eat. So now that I allow myself unconditional permission to eat pizza, for example, when I'm around it, I'm not ravenous about it. I don't think, oh my gosh, I have to get all this pizza in because I'm going to restrict myself from this tomorrow. I know I can eat this pizza now. I can have some leftovers later and have however much I want tomorrow as well. There's no restrictions in my mind. So I'm controlled around my pizza when I eat it. The more a person is exposed to a certain food, the less appealing it becomes. Another example of that would be leftovers. Now I realize leftovers just kind of lose their quality after a while, but I just think when I make something like my favorite food, that I make, one of my only good recipes really is a butternut squash lasagna. It's delicious. It's really great the first night. It's okay the second night. By the third night, I am so over it. I can't even look at another butternut squash. It does have something to do with loss of quality after a few days in the fridge, but really it's just because I'm sick of it and I've given myself unconditional permission to eat it for way too long. And now I'm ready to move on to something else. Okay. Principle number 7 is cope with emotions without using food. All right, you can use the chat box again. What are some emotions that evoke a desire within you to eat? Some emotions that might bring you to the fridge at your house or the mini fridge in your office. Stress, boredom, being upset, anger, yes, depression, absolutely, frustration. You could pretty much fill in any emotion, and that would be it. Sleepy is another really good one. Absolutely. I find myself, thinking if I'm tired on a Saturday night trying to watch the football game, what can I eat to keep myself awake? Doesn't really work that way. Good. Thank you for typing those into the comments. So the first question is, are you taking care of you? And this really goes back to the cornerstone of intuitive eating, which is self-care. So is your emotional eating, in quotes, actually related to a lack of self-care? When you're lacking in self-care, it's really hard to be attuned to your body's needs and desires or your body's hunger and fullness cues. So think back at that one of those first slides I showed you. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you taking care of yourself well enough to really be able to be attuned to your body's needs? That's the first question. So also keep in mind that having a good self-care plan is really integral to help you deal with emotional ups and downs. So again, think of those self-care basics. If you're not getting enough sleep, your life-work balance is off, you're not giving yourself enough calories because some diet program on TV told you only need 1,200 calories, which I will tell you is probably not true. You're not giving yourself enough fluids or water. You don't have comfort, warmth, good, wholesome relationships, and creative stimulation. Maybe you don't have enough creative stimulation in your job. Nurturance, asking for hugs. My mom is a big, big hugger, and I have to remember that she loves hugs. And when she comes to give me a hug, I have to hug her back. I'm just not a hugger. Even with my mom, she probably thinks I'm crazy, but I don't know. But I have to remember that's what nurtures her. Read a book for pleasure, get a massage, meditate, whatever you want to do to nurture yourself. And compassion. And I mentioned this at the beginning. When you find that you are going to the refrigerator for something, but you're really not that hungry, or maybe you just ate an entire pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, I want to ask you to do one thing. And that is not put yourself down. Try not to feel guilty. Instead, come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. Ask yourself, why did I just do that? What is going through my mind? What do I need to take care of emotionally that this food really isn't helping with? So come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. Actually, the more guilt we put on ourselves, the worse off we are in a lot of ways. So come from that place of curiosity, not judgment. And a good way to do that, if you do find yourself sitting at the kitchen counter eating an entire pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, or even I know for me, during COVID last year, when I was working from home, I found myself just wandering down to the kitchen a lot. And for me, it was boredom. Not that I was bored with my job, but it was different not being around other people or in my office at work. So I had to ask myself, what do I feel now and what do I need now? So if I didn't have any creative stimulation at work that day, that's what I would tell myself. Okay, I'm just a little bit bored and I need something to get my mind moving. And I'm trying to go to food, but that's not really going to help me. What I need now is probably a walk around the block and some fresh air, a time out. Here are some other things you can do when you want to eat emotionally. Take a bath, call a friend, write in your journal, play a fun playlist, drink some tea. You can add tons of other things to that. So if you're wondering if nutrition comes into play in any of the principles of intuitive eating, I do want to let you know that yes, actually the 10th principle talks about gentle nutrition. We're not going to talk about it today, but I did interview one of the co-authors of intuitive eating, Elise Resch, on my podcast, episode 105 of the Dietitian's Dish podcast, if you're interested, or if you listen to podcasts. But I would highly encourage you to listen to that. But I, of course, would first recommend reading the book before you get into that. But that's just a little bit on gentle nutrition. Just a reminder that intuitive eating is a journey, not a destination. I think a lot of diets have a destination focus, lose X amount of pounds in this, amount of time. Intuitive eating is absolutely a journey and hopefully a lifelong journey of learning. These are the two books that I highly recommend. The 4th edition just came out last year. On the right, you can get that on Amazon, of course, and probably any other bookstore you go to, Barnes and Noble. And then there's the Intuitive Eating Workbook that walks you through different activities that you can do to kind of learn more about yourself and where you're at with intuitive eating. I highly encourage both of those. A couple other books, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on these, but if you're interested in those, you can look them up on Amazon or again, Barnes and Noble, wherever you shop for your books. But if you're going to choose any of these, I highly recommend Body Respect by Lindo Bacon. It's just amazing. Just a reminder, eating healthy isn't perfect and perfect eating isn't healthy. Give yourself some grace, compassion, and come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. And there I am eating my favorite food, cake with buttercream icing. Oh, and I have a placeholder for this week's presentation that I didn't update. Sorry, David.
It's okay. No worries. Do you have any off the top of your head you wanted to share? Otherwise, we can go to some questions.
Wait, no, I sent this to him. I didn't realize I was supposed to put it in the slide. So I apologize. It'll be updated, I think, when I send you the new one and we put it in the link that everyone can go to for this presentation, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, we do have a couple of questions. So the first one I will ask is from the chat. How does intuitive eating and portion control come into play?
That's a great question. So it really doesn't. I consider portion control another way of restricting. When I was trying to control my portions or tell people to control their portions, you're not listening to your body's needs. And you're sort of ignoring what your body actually needs if you're so focused on controlling your portions. So they really do not coincide or work together at all.
All right. The next one is, what if your body does not give you good signals for hunger or thirst?
That's a really great question. And I'm just going to say what I've learned personally and from what the book implies. But I think that often happens when you're chronically dieting. When we are chronically dieting and we've been dieting for years, off and on, we lose the ability to actually be attuned to our body and understand our body's very nuanced signals. I lost that ability for many years of dieting. So it really just takes practice to get back to being able to understand those signals. Your body is giving you those signals. I guarantee it. You just have to practice finding those signals and paying attention to those signals. And it does take time to get that back. Absolutely. But I promise your body is giving you those signals.
Can you speak to how or when your doctor suggests avoiding certain foods, carbs, or soft drinks in order to lose weight?
Yeah, and this is kind of a loaded question. And this goes back to my last slide, which was that book, Body Respect. I am also a huge proponent of the health at every size movement. If you are not familiar with it, I really encourage you to look it up, but even more so, get the book Body Respect by Lindo Bacon. I happen to believe that your weight has very, very little to do with your health. Unfortunately, though, most doctors look at it the other way. Like if you come in, I went in for an ear infection like 3 months ago and they got me on the scale. There was absolutely no reason to get me on the scale. They didn't prescribe me anything. It was useless. So I can't really necessarily speak to what your doctor was saying, but I will just tell you this. I firmly believe weight has very, very little, if anything, to do with your health. The main focus should be on health habits, period. End of story. Getting sleep, taking care of yourself with those basic self-care needs, and finding the satisfaction in food and food freedom rather than restricting, which always is what's happening when we're trying to lose weight.
Great. If you've got a couple more minutes, we've got a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay. What should you do when you don't find yourself hungry due to stress and anxiety?
Eat anyway. Well, first I will say, if you're chronically stressed and anxious, talk to someone, find help. We've got a great EAP program, which I have used several times, not just for myself, but for my family members. And they make it really, really easy to find help. That's the first thing I would say. But second thing I would say is just eat anyway. And going back to that person who says they don't notice the signals, continue to eat. It's best if we eat at every 3 to 4 hours. So if you find that you're not hungry, still eat something. It doesn't have to be something large, but something to get your metabolism going and to get those signals back. But if you're too stressed and too anxious to eat, I would say still eat. Find something that you really love, or that's quick to eat, like a smoothie that can be nutrient dense that you can sip on. Because I know when I'm stressed and anxious, the last thing I want to do is eat. So even drinking something like a wholesome smoothie would be good to get that nourishment that we need.
How do you stop the emotional eating if you've been doing it for 40 years?
Oh, that's such a good question. First, I want to tell you, you're not alone. And then I would secondly encourage you to read that chapter in the intuitive eating book about emotional eating, because I only talked about like 1/10 of that chapter. But again, I would also go back to what I did say in making sure that first your basic self-care needs are being met, because you could not be attuned to your body because of a lack in self-care, or you could be trying to make up for a lack of self-care by eating. So making sure that you're first meeting those basic self-care principles, and then read that book, the chapter, I think it was Principle 7 in the intuitive eating book. I highly encourage you to do that. And get the workbook too. It's got some really good activities in there for you to do if you're an emotional eater.
Couple more.
Yeah.
Can you recommend any healthy foods to prevent midsection weight gain when you're in your 50s?
Well, I'm going to go back to my previous answer. I really don't recommend any food for weight loss or prevention of weight gain. I am a huge proponent of just accepting the way your body is and just going with the flow. And I know that's so hard for people to hear me say, but that's just me. That's who I am and how I work. I don't recommend any food for weight loss or weight gain prevention, because that's just not my area anymore. It used to be, but just not anymore.
Okay. One person is curious how this is helpful, or if it is helpful for diabetics.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there are many dietitians out there who specialize in intuitive eating for diabetes. And I would actually say it's almost more important for someone with diabetes, because it's so hard to have food freedom and a good relationship with food when you're diabetic. I had gestational diabetes, and I will tell you, I became obsessed with carbohydrates and getting the right amount of carbohydrates and reading labels. I was not an intuitive eater through that entire process. So I would say it's definitely possible to be an intuitive eater with diabetes, and even probably more important to do so when you have diabetes. So you have that healthy relationship with food. And if that person wants to email me, I can send them some resources and specific dietitians who work with diabetics on intuitive eating.
Do you happen to have a slide with your contact info, or if not, what's your dot number, and I'll type it in the chat.
Sure. Thank you. My dot number is 78. So it's Forster, FORSTER.78@osu.edu.
Awesome. One more question in the Q&A. Is this compatible with trying to balance macros, or is that still a type of restriction, or does your body develop an intuition about that?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great question. And I think you answered it, because yes, I would say that macro counting is another way of restriction. For a long, long time, I just counted my calories. And I used to say to people, I've never done a diet before. I've never dieted. But by counting my calories and having a specific amount of calories that I needed, I was ultimately restricting something, whether it was putting extra dressing on my salad because it had too many calories. The same thing with macros. You're still internalizing, you're using external cues and external things like labels. You're referring to those when deciding what to eat instead of your actual biological needs. So yes, I would still consider that a diet. Yep.
We really appreciate your time today, Gina. It's been a great presentation. Just want to echo what everyone is saying in the chat. Just a lot of really great comments. And so with that, everyone, I think that's all the time we've got for today. We really appreciate you joining us. Next week, we're going to talk about motivation and strategies to embrace the holidays and flourish in life's unpredictable moments. And that will be the final session of this rendition of the series. So we're really glad to have you join us, and we will see you next week.
And feel free to email me, everyone. Thank you.